The Zephyrian warship Valkor drifted through the vast emptiness of space, its sleek hull reflecting the cold light of distant stars. Commander Solara Vexus stood at the command deck, her sharp eyes fixed on the glowing displays before her. It was supposed to be a routine patrol, another quiet day in the Matriarchy's territory. But then, a single, impossible blip appeared on the radar. Solara frowned, her fingers tightening around the armrest of her command chair. "Report," she ordered, her voice crisp and commanding. One of her officers, a young strategist, hesitated. "Commander, it's a human ship." The silence that followed was deafening. Solara's heart pounded, though her face remained unreadable. A human. Impossible. The Matriarchy had long dismissed them as ancient myths, stories whispered between warriors to scare unruly recruits. No living Zephyrian had ever encountered one, and yet, here it was. A real human vessel, small but armed, drifting dangerously close to Zephyrian territory. Her pulse quickened, though whether from curiosity or battle instinct, she could not tell. "Hail them," she commanded. A few tense seconds passed before the screen flickered, and then a human appeared. He was seated in the pilot's chair, looking completely at ease despite the warship looming before him. His hair was slightly tousled, and a confident smirk tugged at the corner of his lips. Even through the grainy transmission, his sharp green eyes carried a spark of mischief. "Ah, hey there," he said casually, leaning back as if he were chatting with an old friend. "Didn't expect company out here." Solara's expression hardened. "Identify yourself." The man raised a brow at her demanding tone, but didn't seem fazed. "Captain Ryland Drake, independent pilot. I was just passing through. Didn't mean to step on any royal toes." Solara narrowed her eyes. His words made little sense. A lone human, drifting through deep space. Either he was reckless or lying. "Your ship is trespassing in Matriarchy-controlled space," she said. "You will power down your engines and surrender at once." Ryland sighed dramatically, shaking his head. "See, that's where we've got a problem. I would surrender, but," he gestured at his control panel, "my ship's not exactly in top shape. If I power down, I might not get her running again." Solara had no patience for games. "Refuse, and we will drag you aboard." Ryland gave a lopsided grin. "Wow, first time meeting a human, and you're already into kidnapping. I was hoping for a nice to meet you first." Solara clenched her jaw. Was he mocking her? Before she could respond, alarms blared across the command deck. "Commander, his ship is moving," one of her officers shouted. Solara's eyes snapped to the radar. Ryland's tiny vessel suddenly jolted forward, veering at an unexpected angle. It was no attack, just a reckless, wild maneuver that no trained pilot would attempt near a warship. He was trying to escape. "Fire a warning shot," she ordered. The ship's cannons hummed, a glowing pulse of energy streaking past Ryland's vessel. But instead of stopping, he spun his ship sideways, narrowly slipping through the blast's shockwave. His laughter crackled through the comms. "Come on, Commander, that's barely a warning," he teased. "You're gonna have to do better than that." Solara's patience finally snapped. "Seize him, now." In an instant, the warship's tractor beam fired, locking onto Ryland's ship before he could make another daring move. His engines strained, lights flickering as he fought against the pull, but it was useless. Ryland let out a sigh. "Well, looks like you win this round, Commander." Solara didn't reply, her gaze locked on the screen. There was something off about him. He had no fear, no desperation. He wasn't a stranded fool or an arrogant rogue. He had a plan, and she would figure out exactly what it was. As the warship pulled him in, Solara allowed herself one last thought. The myths were wrong. Humans were very, very real, and this one was trouble. The Zephyrian warship Valkor hummed with quiet power as it pulled the small human vessel into its docking bay. Inside, the elite warriors of the Matriarchy stood in perfect formation, their weapons primed. They were expecting a dangerous, possibly hostile creature. But when the airlock finally hissed open, Captain Ryland Drake strolled out like he owned the place. His hands were casually raised to show he wasn't a threat, but there was no fear in his sharp green eyes. If anything, there was amusement. He gave a slow, exaggerated look around at the towering warriors before him. "Wow," he said. whistling. "You ladies really rolled out the red carpet for me, huh?" A few of the warriors stiffened, glancing at Commander Solara Vexus for direction. She stepped forward, arms folded across her chest, her gaze like steel. "You are in no position to be joking, human." Ryland's grin widened. "Depends. If I'm about to be executed, then yeah, this is probably a bad time for jokes." He tilted his head. "But if I'm not, then maybe I just like making a strong first impression." Solara studied him. He was too calm. Any sane being would be panicking by now. Instead, he was standing there, smirking at an entire squad of armed warriors. She didn't trust him. "Take him," she ordered. 2 warriors stepped forward, seizing Ryland's arms. He let them, but as they pushed him forward, he winced dramatically. Hey, careful, I'd bruise easily." The guards ignored him, leading him through the cold metal corridors of the warship. Other warriors stopped to stare, whispering as he passed. A real human, something none of them had seen before. The rumors would spread quickly. Finally, they reached the interrogation chamber. The room was dark, with a single metal chair in the center. The warriors shoved Ryland into the seat, securing his wrists with energy restraints. Solara stood before him, her expression unreadable. "Tell me, Captain Drake," she said slowly. "How did you get here?" Ryland stretched his fingers, testing the restraints. "Oh, took a wrong turn at Alpha Centauri." Solara's patience thinned. Humans are not supposed to exist. Ryland arched a brow. "And yet, here I am." She studied him carefully. "Are there more of you? If I say no, will you believe me?" "No." He sighed, leaning back in the chair as much as the restraints allowed. "Look, I don't know what kind of bedtime stories you grew up with, but humans aren't myths. We've been out here a long time. It's just that, apparently, you ladies weren't paying attention." Solara narrowed her eyes. He spoke so casually, as if he wasn't surrounded by a fleet that could crush his ship with ease. "I don't trust you," she said. Ryland grinned. "That's fair. I don't trust you either." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The tension in the room was thick, charged with something unspoken. Then Solara leaned in slightly. "What are you really doing in our territory, Captain?" Ryland's smirk faded just a little. He hesitated, just for a second, and that second told Solara everything. There was something he wasn't saying, something important. Before she could press him further, an urgent beep came from her communicator. A warrior's voice crackled through. "Commander, we have a situation. An unknown ship just entered our sector." Solara's gaze snapped back to Ryland, and for the first time, he wasn't smiling. A sharp silence filled the interrogation room. The moment the transmission ended, Commander Solara Vexus turned away from Ryland, tapping a command on her wrist communicator. "Show me," she ordered. The holographic screen flickered to life, displaying the unknown vessel drifting into their sector. It was sleek, dark, and clearly not Cypherian design. The ship moved with a deliberate, almost predatory grace. Solara's jaw tightened. Not good. She turned back to Ryland, expecting to see him watching her with amusement. But for the first time since he'd arrived, his smile was gone. His expression was serious, eyes locked on the hologram. That confirmed it. "You know that ship," Solara said. Ryland exhaled through his nose, tilting his head as if deciding how much to say. Then he gave her a small, knowing smile. "I was really hoping they wouldn't find me this fast." Solara's patience snapped. She stepped forward, grabbing the front of his uniform. "Who are they?" Ryland met her gaze, unshaken. "Pirates," he said simply. The word sent a ripple of unease through the warriors in the room. Not just any pirates. The Zephyrians didn't fear much, but they knew there were forces lurking in deep space that even their mighty war fleets avoided. "They call themselves the Revenant Syndicate," Ryland continued. "They don't take prisoners. They don't negotiate." His expression darkened. "They just burn everything in their path." Solara's fingers tightened around his uniform. She hated how calm he sounded, like he'd seen it happen before. She let go of him and turned to the nearest warrior. "Raise the battle shields. Prepare all weapons." "Yes, Commander." The warrior sprinted from the room, alarms beginning to echo through the warship. Raylan leaned forward in his chair, his hand still bound. I assume you'll want me out of these. He wiggled his fingers. I fight better when I can actually move. Solara studied him. Every logical instinct told her to keep him restrained. But logic wasn't going to help if this turned into a fight for survival. She activated her wrist device. The restraints flickered and vanished. Raylan flexed his hands, rolling his shoulders. See, this is why I like you, Solara. You've got great instincts. Don't make me regret it, she warned. But before he could answer, the warship lurched violently. The floor beneath them trembled. Red warning lights flashed across the walls. They're firing on us. A voice crackled over the communicator. Shields holding, but they're strong, Commander. Solara's expression hardened. Then we hit them back twice as hard. She turned, ready to storm out, then hesitated. Raylan stood beside her now, rubbing his wrists, looking at the hologram with an unreadable expression. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't panicking. He was calculating. Solara had seen that look before. It wasn't the look of a man facing death. It was the look of a man who knew exactly what to do. She exhaled sharply. You have a plan, don't you? Raylan's grin returned. I always have a plan. Solara folded her arms. Let's hear it. His eyes gleamed. Oh, I'll tell you. But first, he tilted his head toward the doorway. I think we should get to the bridge before your ship gets blown to pieces. Solara muttered a curse under her breath. She hated to admit it, but he was right. The warship's hulls shook as another blast struck the shields. Alarms wailed, and crew members sprinted to their stations. Commander Solara Vexus moved quickly, leading Raylan through the chaos toward the bridge. Warriors stepped aside for her, though many threw wary glances at the human following behind her. Raylan didn't seem fazed. He walked with his usual confident stride, even as the ship rumbled around them. You sure those shields will hold? He asked, his voice casual. For now, Solara replied. But if these pirates are as dangerous as you claim, we can't afford to test their patience. They stepped onto the bridge. The massive view screen showed the enemy ship, a dark, angular vessel, circling like a predator. It fired again, but the Zephyrian warship's shields absorbed the blast. A warrior turned to Solara. Commander, we are returning fire. Direct hits, but their armor is strong. Solara's sharp gaze flicked to Raylan. You said you had a plan. Tell me. Raylan studied the enemy ship for a moment, then smirked. Oh, I do, but you're not gonna like it. Solara crossed her arms. Try me. He pointed at the screen. See that ship? It's tough, sure, but it's not built for a close-quarters fight. They rely on shields and heavy cannons, but their biggest weakness. He tapped the screen. Their power core, buried deep, but exposed if you know where to look. Solara frowned. And how exactly do you know where to look? Raylan flashed a grin. Let's just say I've had a few encounters with the Revenant Syndicate before. That didn't sit well with her, but there was no time for questioning. So what do you propose? She asked. Raylan leaned against the control panel, looking completely at ease. We drop shields for a split second, just enough to let a distraction drone out. They'll see the drop and think we're vulnerable, so they'll move in to finish us off. Solara's jaw clenched. That's a huge risk. Yeah, but here's the fun part. He pointed at a section of the enemy ship. When they get close, we fire everything we've got right here. Their armor is weakest at this point. It'll overload their systems. One of the bridge officers scoffed. And what if you're wrong? Raylan shrugged. Then we explode. But hey, at least we'll go out in style. Solara glared at him, but she could see his confidence wasn't just arrogance. He was sure of this. She turned to her crew. Prepare the distraction drone. Get ready to drop the shields on my command. The crew hesitated, clearly uneasy, but they obeyed. The drone was loaded into position. The enemy ship kept circling, waiting for a weakness. Solara inhaled deeply. This was madness, but something in her gut told her to trust him. Now, she ordered. For a heartbeat, the shields dropped. The drone shot out like a missile, and almost immediately, the pirate ship turned sharply, moving in for the kill. Solara clenched her fists. Hold, hold. The enemy ship was right where Rylan predicted. "Fire," she commanded. The Zypherian warship unleashed everything. Plasma cannons, disruptor torpedoes, railgun blasts. A direct hit struck the exact weak spot Rylan had pointed out. The pirate ship shuddered violently. Explosions erupted along its hull. The lights flickered. Then, with a final deafening boom, the entire vessel split apart. The bridge went silent. Then, cheers. Silara let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. She turned to Rylan, who looked extremely pleased with himself. "Told you it would work," he said with a wink. Silara rolled her eyes, but she had to admit it. The human was impressive. The bridge was still buzzing with victory. Warriors exchanged triumphant nods, and some even looked at Rylan with grudging respect. The enemy ship was nothing but floating wreckage now, and the Zephyrian warship remained intact. Silara turned to her crew. Damage report. Minor hull breaches, but the shields absorbed most of the impact. A lieutenant replied. Weapons systems are still operational. She nodded. Good. Begin salvage operations. If there are any survivors, secure them for interrogation. Rylan stretched his arms behind his head. So, does this mean I get a medal? Silara crossed her arms. It means you get to keep breathing. Rylan smirked. I'll take it. The moment of calm didn't last long. A sharp rhythmic sound echoed through the bridge. The crew immediately went silent. Rylan frowned as he watched the warriors strike their fists against their chests in unison. Silara didn't look at him. She was staring at the main doors as they slid open, revealing an imposing figure stepping inside. A warrior, taller than the others, wearing armor marked with intricate battle etchings, strode toward them. His movements were precise, powerful. His gaze landed directly on Rylan. Rylan sighed. Let me guess, he's not a fan of humans. Silara's voice was calm, but there was a hard edge to it. This is Captain Vorian, leader of the Zypherian High Guard. Vorian stopped in front of them, his piercing gaze locked onto Rylan. You have interfered in our battle. You have fought alongside us. That means you are not just a guest anymore. Rylan raised an eyebrow. Oh, and what exactly does that mean? The crew around them tensed. Some looked almost excited, others wary. Silara clenched her jaw. It means you are now subject to our laws. Rylan exhaled slowly. I don't like where this is going. Vorian took a step forward. By tradition, those who prove themselves in combat must be tested. You fought well, but words and tactics are not enough. Rylan glanced at Silara. Is he saying what I think he's saying? Silara didn't blink. You have been challenged to a warrior's duel. Rylan blinked twice. Wait, what? Vorian's voice remained deadly calm. If you wish to remain among us, you must prove your strength in combat. Face me in the arena. Rylan ran a hand through his hair. So let me get this straight. I saved the ship, blow up the bad guys, and my reward is fighting a guy who looks like he wrestles war machines for fun. Silara didn't react. You can refuse. Great, then I'll just. But she continued. Refusing would be seen as cowardice, and you would no longer be welcome aboard this ship, or in my presence. Rylan froze. He looked at her. Something in her voice, in her eyes, told him this wasn't just some random challenge. It was important. His gaze shifted back to Vorian, who stood tall, waiting. Rylan let out a long sigh. Fine, let's dance. The warriors around them grinned, some in approval, others in amusement. The challenge had been accepted. There was no turning back now. Silara finally allowed herself a small smile. Try not to die, human. Rylan smirked. No promises. Rylan stood in the center of the Zephyrian combat arena, rolling his shoulders as the crowd gathered around. The space was a massive circular chamber, its walls lined with observers in armor, all eager to see the outcome of this fight. Torches flickered against the metallic walls, casting shadows that stretched like watching figures. Across from him, Captain Vorian stood tall, his stance unshaken. He removed the outer layers of his armor, revealing a physique built for battle. His arms crossed over his chest as he studied Rylan. The challenge is simple, Silara announced from the sidelines. Victory comes when one fighter yields or can no longer stand. Rylan exhaled. Right, no problem. Just gotta survive. A warrior stepped forward, carrying two weapons, one meant for Rylan, one for Vorian. Rylan took his weapon, a long staff with an electrified edge. He turned it in his hands, testing the weight. Ha, fancy. Vorian took his own, a short curved blade, and held it with ease. His expression remained unreadable. Solara raised her hand. Begin. Vorian moved first, a blur of speed. Rylan barely had time to react before the blade sliced through the air toward him. He dodged, stumbling slightly. The Zypherian warriors watching chuckled. Not used to this kind of welcome party, Rylan muttered. Vorian didn't wait. He struck again, forcing Rylan to block with his staff. Sparks crackled as the weapons met. The force nearly knocked Rylan backward. Faster than you look, Rylan admitted. Vorian didn't reply. He spun, aiming a kick at Rylan's side. This time, Rylan expected it. He dropped low, letting the kick whiff past him, and jabbed the staff into Vorian's midsection. The electrified tip crackled, sending a brief shockwave through the air. Vorian staggered but didn't fall. He looked down at the mark on his armor and then smirked. Rylan blinked. Oh, that's not good. Before he could react, Vorian's blade sliced forward again, this time catching Rylan's shoulder. The pain was sharp, but the cut wasn't deep. Rylan gritted his teeth. Okay, that one's gonna sting tomorrow. The warriors watching cheered. Some pounded their fists against their armor. Solara watched closely, her expression unreadable. Rylan knew he couldn't win by brute force. Vorian had experience, power, and speed. But Rylan had something else, unpredictability. He took a step back, adjusting his grip. All right, big guy, let's try something different. Vorian lunged forward again, blade aimed at Rylan's chest. But instead of dodging, Rylan dropped his staff. Vorian's eyes widened for half a second, a moment of confusion. That was all Rylan needed. He stepped into Vorian's swing, grabbing the warrior's wrist and twisting. The momentum sent the blade flying from Vorian's grip. The crowd gasped. Rylan didn't stop there. He hooked his foot behind Vorian's leg and yanked. For the first time, Captain Vorian lost his balance. He hit the ground hard. Silence filled the arena. Rylan grinned, panting. How's that for a human trick? Vorian stared at him. Then slowly, he started laughing. The watching warriors cheered louder than before. Rylan glanced toward Solara. She was still watching him, her lips curving into a small, rare smile. Maybe, just maybe, he had earned more than just survival today. The arena remained silent for a moment, the weight of Rylan's unexpected victory hanging in the air. Then the gathered warriors erupted into thunderous cheers, pounding their fists against their armor. Rylan, still breathing hard, wiped the sweat from his forehead and glanced down at Captain Vorian. The warrior grinned up at him, his expression a mixture of amusement and approval. You fight, strangely, Vorian admitted, but effectively. Rylan chuckled, offering a hand. Yeah, well, I figured swinging weapons wasn't gonna work for me. Had to improvise. Vorian took his hand and rose to his feet, his strength still undeniable. He clapped a heavy hand on Rylan's shoulder. You've earned my respect, human. Rylan's arm nearly buckled under the force of that gesture, but he forced himself to stay upright. Glad to hear it, he said. I'd rather be respected than impaled. The warriors surrounding them continued their cheers and shouts, some nodding in approval, others looking at Rylan with newfound curiosity. Solara stepped forward, her gaze fixed on him. Her expression was unreadable, but her voice held a slight warmth. You are full of surprises, Rylan. Rylan smirked. That's me. Full of surprises and minor injuries. He winced, rolling his shoulder where Vorian had cut him earlier. Solara's eyes flickered to the wound. Without hesitation, she reached out, pressing her fingers lightly against his skin. A faint warmth spread through his shoulder, dulling the pain. Rylan tensed, caught off guard by the unexpected gentleness of her touch. That's convenient, he muttered. Solara withdrew her hand, giving him a knowing look. You will need to be at full strength for what comes next. Rylan's brows furrowed. Wait, what comes next? Vorian laughed, crossing his arms. You have proven yourself as a warrior, but now you must prove yourself as a partner. Rylan blinked. Partner. Solara turned to face the gathered warriors. By our laws, the battle has demonstrated his strength. Now we must see if he is worthy to stand beside me. The warriors cheered louder, some shouting phrases Rylan didn't understand. He looked at Solara, heart pounding. You mean, I passed the first test, and now there's another? Solara nodded. Of course. Rylan ran a hand through his hair. Fantastic. And what's this next test? Solara stepped closer, her voice softer now. It is not something that can be won by force or tricks. It is something that must be felt. Rylan swallowed. He could handle fights, space battles, and impossible odds, but something told him this challenge might be the hardest of all. Rylan stood frozen, his heart pounding in his chest. The roaring warriors around him felt like distant echoes as he processed Solara's words. Something that must be felt. He repeated, rubbing the back of his neck. You know, I'm much better at fights and quick escapes than emotional trials. Solara's lips curved into a small, knowing smile. Then this will be your greatest challenge yet. The warriors formed a wide circle, murmuring in anticipation. Rylan wasn't sure what they expected, but Solara took a step closer, her gaze steady and unyielding. You have proven your strength, she said. Now you must prove your heart. Rylan blinked. My heart. Vorian, standing nearby, chuckled. It means you must show why you want to stand beside her, not just as a warrior, but as an equal. Rylan glanced around at the expectant faces. There was no trick, no weapon, no fight to win. It was just him, a human who somehow stumbled into something far bigger than himself. He took a deep breath, then met Solara's eyes. You want to know why I want to stand beside you, he said, voice steady. Because since the moment I set foot on your ship, you have challenged me in ways no one else ever has. The warriors grew silent. You don't just see me as a human, you see what I can be, Rylan continued. And yeah, maybe I've been thrown into this without a clue, but if there's one thing I do know, it's that I don't want to leave your side. Solara's expression softened just a little. Rylan took another step forward, voice lowering. You're strong, stubborn, and more terrifying than half the things I've fought in my life. But somehow, that's what makes me want to stay. Not because I have to, not because of a test, but because. He hesitated, then exhaled. Because I choose to. A hushed silence followed. Then, Vorian let out a booming laugh. Well spoken, human. The warriors erupted into cheers, some clanging their weapons together in approval. Solara studied him for a long moment. Then, slowly, she reached out her hand. Rylan didn't hesitate. He took it. A warmth spread between them, and he felt something shift, something unspoken but undeniable. Solara nodded. Then it is decided. The warriors roared in celebration. Rylan, still holding Solara's hand, smirked. So, does this mean I passed? Solara's grip tightened slightly. You passed. Rylan let out a relieved chuckle. Good, because honestly, I think I'm starting to like it here. As the celebrations continued around them, Rylan realized something. This wasn't just about proving himself anymore. This was the start of something far greater, something that could change both their worlds forever.